The dust kicked up by hooves and boots hung in the sweltering Oklahoma air like a brown fog of desperation. 16-year-old Luna Mae Holloway pressed herself against the weathered wooden fence of the Broken Arrow Livestock Auction, watching as ranchers and buyers moved through the holding pens with the casual indifference of people shopping for groceries rather than living beings. Luna's stomach growled audibly, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since yesterday's stale gas station sandwich. The crumpled $20 bill in her pocket, money she'd earned cleaning motel rooms at $5 an hour, represented her family's last hope for acquiring something, anything, that could help them survive another month on their failing homestead. "Mama needs a milk cow," she whispered to herself, repeating the mantra that had gotten her through the 40-mile bus ride to the auction. But as she watched the bidding wars over decent livestock, her $20 felt more like 20 cents. That's when she heard it, a sound that made every person within 100 yards take an involuntary step backward. The roar that erupted from Pen 47 was unlike anything Luna had ever heard. It wasn't the ordinary bellow of an upset bull, but something deeper, more primal, filled with such rage and pain that it seemed to shake the very ground beneath her worn sneakers. Other auction goers immediately veered away from that section of the facility, muttering warnings and shaking their heads in disgust. But Luna found herself walking directly toward the sound. In Pen 47 stood the most magnificent and terrifying creature she'd ever seen. The bull was massive, easily 1,700 pounds of pure muscle, with a coat the color of burnished copper that gleamed like molten metal in the harsh Oklahoma sun. His head was lowered in a threatening posture, and his dark eyes burned with such fury that looking into them felt like staring into a storm. But it wasn't his size or his obvious anger that made Luna stop and stare. It was the scars. The bull's hide was crisscrossed with old injuries, rope burns around his neck, gouges along his flanks that spoke of brutal handling, and a particularly nasty mark across his left shoulder that looked like it had been made by something sharp and deliberately cruel. This wasn't just an aggressive animal, this was a creature that had been systematically abused until violence became his only language. "Don't even look at that one, honey." Luna turned to see an elderly rancher shaking his head at her with paternal concern. His weathered face bore the kind of deep lines that came from decades of working with livestock, and his eyes held genuine worry. "That bull's been through 6 different owners in 2 years, the rancher continued. "Every one of them tried to break him, and every one of them got hurt trying. He's what we call a killer bull, too dangerous for anything but the slaughterhouse." "What's his name?" Luna asked quietly. The rancher spat into the dirt. "Most folks just call him Devil. Real name's Oliver. Fancy name for such a mean son of a gun. He's going up for bid in 20 minutes, but I guarantee you nobody's going to want him except the meat packers." As if he'd heard his name, the bull, Oliver, raised his massive head and fixed those burning dark eyes directly on Luna. For a moment that stretched like eternity, girl and bull regarded each other across 30 feet of dusty ground and rusted steel. Luna saw the rage, yes, but beneath it she recognized something that made her heart clench with unexpected understanding. She saw the same desperate isolation she felt every time she walked through the halls of her high school, where her patched clothes and empty lunch tray marked her as different, unwanted, a problem to be avoided. "He's not evil," Luna said softly. "He's just scared." The rancher laughed, not unkindly. "Scared? Honey, that bull put 3 men in the hospital. Last owner tried to ride him and ended up with 2 broken ribs and a concussion. Before that, he trampled a fence so bad they had to rebuild half the corral. That ain't scared, that's dangerous." But Luna wasn't listening to the rancher anymore. She was watching Oliver's ears, noting how they swiveled toward her voice when she spoke, how his aggressive posturing seemed to lessen slightly when she maintained eye contact without challenging or threatening him. "Nobody wants me either," Luna whispered, too quietly for anyone else to hear. "I know what that feels like." As if responding to her words, Oliver took a step closer to the fence. Not the charging, aggressive advance that had sent other observers running, but something more cautious, almost curious. His massive head tilted slightly, and for just a moment, the fury in his eyes seemed to flicker into something else entirely. "Attention bidders!" The auctioneer's voice boomed across the facility through crackling speakers. "We're moving to lot 47. Oliver. This is an ASIS sale. No warranties, no returns. Bidding starts at $200. Luna's heart sank. $200 might as well have been $2,000. But as she started to turn away, accepting that her $20 would have to go toward another failed attempt at buying feed or medicine for their sick chickens, she heard something that stopped her cold. $150, called out a voice from the buyer's section. Cash sale, immediate removal. Luna turned to see a man in a blood-stained apron who could only be from one of the meat processing plants. He was bidding not on a living animal, but on hamburger and steaks that hadn't been cut yet. $150 going once, the auctioneer called, his voice carrying neither enthusiasm nor regret, just the mechanical efficiency of a man who'd sold thousands of animals to their deaths. Something broke open inside Luna's chest. Maybe it was the way Oliver had looked at her, or maybe it was the recognition that in a few minutes, the most magnificent creature she'd ever seen would be reduced to nothing more than packaged meat on a grocery store shelf. Maybe it was just the accumulated weight of too many years watching everything beautiful in her world disappear because nobody else saw its value. $20! Luna's voice cut through the hot air like a blade. Every head in the auction yard turned toward her. The meat packer laughed out loud. The auctioneer looked confused. Other bidders began murmuring amongst themselves, trying to figure out if this was some kind of joke. "Young lady," the auctioneer said carefully, "the current bid is $150. "I know," Luna replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "But I'm bidding $20, and I'm willing to take him exactly as he is." The meat packer's laugh grew louder. "Honey, you can't buy a bull with grocery money. That animal's worth more dead than you'll see in a month." "Going once at $150, the auctioneer continued, ignoring Luna's pathetic bid. That's when Oliver did something that made everyone in the yard fall silent. He walked directly to the section of fence closest to Luna and pressed his massive head against the steel bars, looking at her with those dark eyes that no longer seemed quite so full of rage. And in that moment, Luna Mae Holloway made a decision that would either save 2 lives or destroy them both. The silence that followed Luna's $20 bid stretched like a taut wire across the auction yard. Oliver remained pressed against the fence, his massive copper-colored bulk somehow managing to look both threatening and vulnerable as his dark eyes stayed fixed on the teenage girl who had dared to speak for him. "Going twice at $150, the auctioneer announced, his gavel raised in the air like an executioner's axe. "Wait," the voice came from an unexpected source. Jeremiah Caulfield, owner of the Circle C Ranch and one of the most respected cattlemen in 3 counties. At 65, Caulfield commanded the kind of authority that made entire auction yards fall silent when he spoke. The auctioneer paused, confused. "Mr. Caulfield?" Caulfield approached the fence where Luna stood, his weathered face impossible to read. He studied Oliver with the expert eye of someone who'd been working with cattle since before Luna was born, then looked down at the girl whose entire net worth wouldn't cover the cost of feeding one of his bulls for a week. "Young lady," Caulfield said quietly, "do you have any idea what you're proposing to do?" Luna lifted her chin with the stubborn pride that was often the only luxury poor people could afford. "I'm proposing to give him a home where nobody will hurt him anymore. That bull has injured more men than I can count. He's unpredictable, dangerous, and completely unmanageable." Caulfield's voice wasn't unkind, but it carried the weight of hard-earned experience. Even if you could somehow afford him, how would you transport him? How would you feed him? How would you house a 1,700-pound animal that's been conditioned to see every human as an enemy? Luna's resolve wavered for just a moment as the practical realities of her situation crashed down on her like a bucket of ice water. She had no truck, no trailer, no proper fencing, and no way to buy the tons of feed that Oliver would need. Her family's homestead was falling apart around them, and she was proposing to add the most expensive, dangerous animal she'd ever encountered to their collection of problems. But then Oliver made a sound she'd never heard from him. Not the rage-filled roar that had sent other bidders running, but something softer, almost questioning, as if he were asking her not to abandon him like everyone else had done. "I'll figure it out," Luna said, her voice quiet but determined. "Someone has to give him a chance." The meat packer, who'd been watching this exchange with growing impatience, stepped forward. "Look, this is real touching and all, but I got a business to run. That bull's worth $1,500 in processing. Your little girl games ain't gonna change that. Actually, Caulfield said slowly, they might. Every eye in the auction yard turned to the respected rancher as he pulled out his phone and made a call that would change everything. Bobby? It's Jeremiah Caulfield. You still got that livestock trailer you ain't using? Yeah, the big one. No, I don't need it for me. He glanced at Luna. I need it for someone who's about to do something either very brave or very stupid, and I can't quite tell which. Luna's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized what was happening. Caulfield was offering to help her, but why? As if reading her mind, Caulfield ended his call and looked down at her with something that might have been approval. 40 years ago, I was in your shoes. Had nothing but determination and $20 to my name. Someone gave me a chance when I needed it most. He gestured toward Oliver. Maybe it's time I passed that along. The auctioneer looked completely bewildered. Mr. Caulfield, are you saying... I'm saying that if this young lady wants to bid $20 on that bull, and if she's got the guts to take responsibility for what happens next, then I'll provide transportation and help her get him settled. Caulfield's voice carried across the yard. But, he continued, looking directly at Luna, this isn't charity. If you take this animal, you're responsible for him. No backing out, no returning him when things get difficult. You understand? Luna nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure she understood anything anymore. The morning had started with her hoping to buy a milk cow and had somehow transformed into a life-altering decision involving the most dangerous animal at the auction. The meatpacker's face flushed with anger. This is ridiculous. You can't let some kid take a bull she can't handle just because... Because what? Caulfield's voice cut through the man's protest like a blade. Because she sees something worth saving where you only see profit? Because she's willing to risk everything for a creature that's been written off by everyone else? Oliver, as if sensing that his fate hung in the balance, pressed harder against the fence and made that soft, questioning sound again. This time, Luna reached through the bars and gently touched his nose. Instead of the violent reaction everyone expected, the massive bull went completely still, his dark eyes closing as if he were savoring the first gentle touch he'd received in years. Well, I'll be damned, someone whispered. The auctioneer looked around the yard, clearly out of his depth. Do I hear any other bids? The meatpacker started to speak, then stopped as he realized that Jeremiah Caulfield's support had just transformed this from a simple business transaction into something much more complicated. Going up against Caulfield's reputation and connections would cost more than the bull was worth. $20 going once, going twice. The auctioneer's gavel hovered in the air. Sold to the young lady for $20. The sound of the gavel falling was like a gunshot in the sudden silence. Luna stared at the receipt that was thrust into her trembling hands, unable to quite believe what had just happened. She owned a bull. She owned Oliver. Congratulations, Caulfield said dryly. You just bought yourself the biggest challenge of your life. As Luna watched Oliver being loaded into Caulfield's trailer, the massive bull cooperating with surprising docility as long as she remained visible, she felt the first stirring of what might have been hope or terror. Probably both. The 40-mile ride back to her family's homestead passed in a blur of practical advice from Caulfield about bull handling, feeding schedules, and the importance of establishing dominance without cruelty. But Luna found herself only half listening, her attention focused on Oliver's copper-colored form visible through the trailer's slats. When they pulled into the dirt driveway of the Holloway homestead, if their collection of patched buildings and rusty equipment could be called that, Luna's mother emerged from the house with the expression of someone who'd learned to expect bad news. Martha Holloway was only 38, but hard years had carved lines around her eyes that made her look older. Her faded dress and work-worn hands told the story of a woman who'd been fighting a losing battle against poverty for longer than she cared to remember. "Luna Mae Holloway," Martha called out, her voice carrying that particular tone mothers used when they suspected their children had done something that would cost money they didn't have. What in the world? Her words died as Oliver stepped out of the trailer. The massive bull surveyed his new surroundings with obvious wariness, his copper coat gleaming in the late afternoon sun. But instead of the aggressive posturing that had defined him at the auction, Oliver remained calm, positioned close to Luna, as if she were his anchor in an uncertain world. "Luna," Martha whispered, her face pale. "Tell me you didn't—" "I bought him, Mama," Luna said quietly. "His name is Oliver, and he's part of our family now." The words hung in the air like a promise and a prayer, while Oliver stood sentinel beside the girl who'd seen worth where everyone else had seen only danger. What happened next would determine whether Luna's impossible faith had saved them all or doomed them. If this incredible story of courage, compassion, and the power of seeing potential where others see only problems has captured your heart, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you these amazing tales of unlikely bonds and the extraordinary things that happen when someone refuses to give up on a soul that everyone else has written off. Trust me, what happens next with Luna and Oliver will completely transform how you think about second chances and the true meaning of family. 3 days after Oliver's arrival at the Holloway homestead, the impossible had happened. Nothing had gone wrong. The massive copper-colored bull had settled into the makeshift pasture with surprising calm, grazing peacefully among their handful of chickens and the ancient milk cow, who seemed more curious than afraid of her new companion. Luna spent every free moment with Oliver, learning his moods and movements with the dedication of someone whose entire world had shifted on its axis. She discovered that beneath his scarred exterior lay a creature of remarkable intelligence and unexpected gentleness, at least with her. "I still can't believe it," Martha said, watching through the kitchen window as Luna brushed Oliver's coat in the early morning light. "That animal hasn't shown an ounce of the aggression everyone warned us about." Her younger son, 8-year-old Bobby, pressed his nose against the glass beside her. "Can I pet him today, Mama? Luna says he's real gentle." "Absolutely not," Martha replied firmly. "I don't care how calm he seems with your sister. That bull is still dangerous." As if to prove her point, the sound of a truck engine announced visitors. Through the dust cloud, Luna could see Jeremiah Caulfield's pickup approaching, followed by a vehicle she didn't recognize. Oliver immediately lifted his massive head, his body going tense as strangers invaded his territory. But instead of the aggressive posturing everyone expected, he simply moved closer to Luna, positioning himself between her and the approaching vehicles. Caulfield emerged from his truck with a man Luna didn't know, someone in his 40s wearing the kind of clean, expensive clothes that marked him as definitely not from around here. "Luna," Caulfield called out, "like you to meet Dr. Marcus Webb from Oklahoma State University. He heard about your bull and wanted to see for himself." "Doctor." Webb approached the fence with the cautious respect of someone who'd worked with dangerous animals, his eyes taking in Oliver's impressive size and obvious conditioning. "Miss Holloway, I have to say I'm amazed. Everything I've heard about this bull suggested he was completely unmanageable." "He's not unmanageable," Luna said quietly, her hand resting on Oliver's neck. "He's just been hurt by people who didn't understand him." Dr. Webb pulled out a notebook. "Would you mind if I observed his behavior for a few minutes? I'm researching animal trauma and recovery, and your situation here might be quite valuable for my work." Luna nodded, though she felt protective instincts rising that surprised her with their intensity. Oliver was her responsibility now, and she wouldn't let anyone treat him like a curiosity or an experiment. For 30 minutes, Dr. Webb watched as Luna led Oliver around the pasture, demonstrating the basic commands the bull had somehow learned to follow. Oliver responded to her voice with precision that defied his reputation, moving left or right, stopping or starting based on her soft-spoken directions. "Remarkable," Dr. Webb murmured, frantically scribbling notes. "His stress indicators are completely normal. Heart rate steady, breathing relaxed. This is the same animal that hospitalized 3 men?" "He was protecting himself," Luna said simply. "Now he doesn't have to." That's when Bobby made his escape from the house. The 8-year-old had been watching from the window, and his curiosity finally overcame his mother's warnings. He slipped out the back door and ran toward the pasture before anyone could stop him. "Bobby, no!" Martha screamed from the porch. Dr. Webb immediately stepped back from the fence as 1,700 pounds of potentially lethal animal became aware of a small child racing toward him. Caulfield reached for his cell phone, ready to call for an ambulance. But Oliver didn't charge or rear or display any of the violence his reputation suggested. Instead, he lowered his massive head and made a soft rumbling sound deep in his chest, almost like a giant cat purring. Bobby skidded to a stop directly in front of Oliver, his 8-year-old fearlessness warring with sudden awareness of just how big the bull really was up close. "Easy, Bobby," Luna said quietly. "Move slow and let him smell you first." What happened next left everyone speechless. Oliver gently lowered his head until he was at Bobby's eye level, allowing the little boy to touch his nose with small, tentative fingers. The bull stood perfectly still, his dark eyes soft with an expression that could only be described as protective. "Well, I'll be damned," Caulfield breathed. Dr. Webb was writing so fast his pen was practically smoking. "This is unprecedented. The behavioral transformation suggests a level of emotional intelligence that most people don't associate with cattle." Martha approached the fence with trembling legs, her maternal instincts warring with disbelief at what she was witnessing. Her youngest son, her baby, was standing next to an animal that supposedly couldn't be trusted around grown men. "Bobby," she called softly, not wanting to startle Oliver. "Come here, sweetheart." But Bobby was enchanted. "He likes me, Mama. Look, he's smiling." Oliver wasn't smiling exactly, but there was something in his expression that suggested contentment, even happiness. This massive creature, who'd been labeled as nothing but dangerous, was revealing himself to be something entirely different. A protector who'd simply been waiting for someone to protect. "Luna," Dr. Webb said quietly, "I'd like to propose something. What you've accomplished here in 3 days, it could change how we approach animal rehabilitation. Would you be willing to work with the university? Nothing intrusive, just documentation and maybe some guidance on expanding your techniques?" Luna looked at Oliver, who was now allowing Bobby to scratch behind his ears with the patience of a giant, gentle dog. "What kind of guidance?" "Funding for proper facilities, veterinary care, maybe even educational programs. What you're doing here, showing that aggressive animals can be rehabilitated through understanding rather than force, it could help thousands of animals." Martha had moved close enough to the fence to watch her son interact with Oliver, her expression shifting from terror to amazement. "Luna, honey, what do you think?" Luna considered the offer carefully. University support could solve so many of their problems: proper fencing, adequate feed, veterinary bills they couldn't afford. But more than that, it might give Oliver the chance to show the world what she'd discovered: that sometimes the most dangerous-seeming creatures just needed someone to see past their defenses. "Only if Oliver gets to stay here," Luna said finally. "This is his home now. We're his family." Dr. Webb smiled. "I think that can be arranged." As the sun set over their small homestead, Luna sat in the pasture with Oliver's massive head resting in her lap, while Bobby dozed against the bull's warm side. What had started as a desperate $20 gamble was becoming something none of them had imagined possible. Oliver had found his family, and they had found their miracle. 6 months after Oliver's arrival, the Holloway homestead had been transformed. The university partnership had brought proper fencing, a sturdy barn, and regular veterinary care that kept Oliver healthy and happy. More importantly, it had brought hope back to a family that had almost forgotten what that felt like. Luna had become something of a local celebrity, featured in agricultural magazines and invited to speak at ranching conferences about her revolutionary approach to animal rehabilitation. But to her, Oliver remained what he'd always been: family. That peaceful morning was shattered by the sound of expensive engines roaring up their dirt driveway. 3 black pickup trucks pulled into the yard, their polished surfaces and custom modifications marking them as vehicles that cost more than most people's homes. From the lead truck emerged a man Luna recognized from newspaper photos: Vincent Blackwater, one of the wealthiest ranch owners in Oklahoma, known for his ruthless business practices and his collection of championship bulls. Behind him stepped 2 men who looked more like bodyguards than ranch hands, their cold eyes scanning the property with professional assessment. Oliver, who had been grazing peacefully in the main pasture, immediately lifted his massive head. His copper coat gleamed in the morning sun as his body went tense, but instead of the aggressive posturing of his auction days, he simply moved closer to where Luna stood by the fence. Miss Holloway, Blackwater called out, his voice carrying the kind of authority that expected immediate compliance. I'm Vincent Blackwater. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Martha emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron, her maternal instincts immediately alert to danger. Bobby peered out from behind her skirts, his 8-year-old eyes wide with concern. I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwater, Luna said carefully, but I don't know what you're referring to. Blackwater's smile was sharp as a blade. That bull, Oliver. I was his original owner before he was sold off due to his behavioral problems. I've spent considerable time and money tracking him down. Dr. Webb's car appeared at the end of the driveway, as if summoned by some invisible signal. The professor had been making his weekly visits to document Oliver's continued progress, but today his timing couldn't have been more perfect. Mr. Blackwater, Dr. Webb said as he approached, his academic credentials lending weight to his words. I'm Dr. Marcus Webb from Oklahoma State University. I've been documenting Oliver's rehabilitation for the past 6 months. May I ask what your interest is in this animal? Blackwater's expression shifted slightly, recognizing that this wasn't going to be as simple as intimidating a poor family into compliance. My interest is ownership. That bull was bred from my champion stock, and I have documentation proving my claim. Do you? Luna asked quietly, her hand finding Oliver's neck. The massive bull had positioned himself so that she could touch him while he kept his dark eyes fixed on Blackwater. Because I have documentation showing that I purchased him legally at public auction. After he was illegally sold by a ranch hand who had no authority to dispose of my property, Blackwater countered. I'm prepared to offer compensation, of course, $50,000 for the bull, and we'll call this unfortunate situation resolved. The amount was staggering, more money than the Holloway family had seen in their entire lives combined. Martha's sharp intake of breath was audible from the porch, but Luna didn't hesitate. He's not for sale. Blackwater's friendly mask slipped, revealing something colder underneath. Miss Holloway, you don't seem to understand. That animal represents a significant financial investment. His bloodline is worth more than this entire property. Then why did you get rid of him? Bobby's small voice cut through the tension like a knife. The 8-year-old had stepped out from behind his mother, his chin raised with the same stubborn pride that Luna often displayed. Blackwater's face flushed. The animal was difficult to manage. He was scared and hurt, Luna said firmly. And instead of helping him heal, you labeled him as dangerous and threw him away. As if responding to the rising tension, Oliver moved even closer to Luna, his massive bulk forming a protective barrier between her and Blackwater. But there was no aggression in the bull's posture, just quiet, unwavering loyalty. This is touching, Blackwater said, his patience clearly exhausted, but ultimately irrelevant. I'm prepared to take this matter to court if necessary. Actually, Dr. Webb interjected, pulling out his phone. You might want to reconsider that approach. Everyone turned to the professor as he showed them his screen. I've been documenting Oliver's transformation for a research project on animal trauma recovery. Your treatment of this animal, Mr. Blackwater, has been illuminating. The scars, the behavioral conditioning, the systematic abuse that led to his aggressive responses, it's all documented. Blackwater went very still. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that any legal action you might consider would bring considerable media attention to your animal husbandry practices. The agricultural community tends to take a dim view of documented animal abuse. The silence stretched taut as Blackwater weighed his options. His business empire was built on reputation and relationships within the ranching community. A public scandal involving animal cruelty could destroy everything he'd built. Furthermore, Dr. Webb continued, Oliver's case has become the foundation for new legislation regarding animal rehabilitation and the rights of rescue animals. Your attempt to reclaim him could very well result in criminal charges. Blackwater looked at Oliver, who was now allowing Bobby to scratch behind his ears while remaining alert to the threat Blackwater represented. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. The same animal Blackwater had labeled as unmanageable was displaying the patience and gentleness of a family pet. This isn't over, Blackwater said finally, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Actually, Luna said quietly, it is. She walked to Oliver's side and wrapped her arms around the bull's massive neck. Oliver immediately lowered his head, resting his chin gently on her shoulder in a gesture of such trust and affection that it took everyone's breath away. You see, Mr. Blackwater, Oliver already chose his family, and we chose him right back. As Blackwater and his men climbed back into their expensive trucks and disappeared in a cloud of dust and defeat, Oliver remained exactly where he belonged, surrounded by the people who had seen his worth when the rest of the world saw only problems. A year later, the Holloway Ranch had become a beacon of hope for damaged animals and struggling families alike. Luna's methods had revolutionized animal rehabilitation, proving that love and understanding could accomplish what force and fear never could. And at the center of it all was Oliver, no longer the aggressive, unwanted bull that no one would bid on, but a gentle giant who had taught an entire community that sometimes the most broken-looking souls just need someone brave enough to say the words that change everything. You're part of my family now. No one wanted this aggressive bull. Until a poor girl said, you're part of my family now.